My editor wants me to experiment with exciting intros. I'm working on it. Alright, we're going to be talking about 10 cards today that are cards you may already know exist, but have gotten considerably better with Aetherdrift having come out. These are not just commanders, these are cards you can put in your 99. There are a few cards here that can be your commander, but basically they bounce off a lot of the new powerful cards we've been seeing, and they may be the kind of cards that could spike in value over the coming days. Some of these have already spiked, sorry, particularly the last one I'm going to be covering. If you are considering some of these cards, you may want to snap them up before they spike. Alright, starting off with Training Grounds and Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Both of these cards fulfill a similar sort of piece of synergy in that they synergize exceptionally well with the exhaust mechanic. If you watched my previous video about some decks to build in Standard, I've been playing around with Temur Exhaust. Training Grounds and Agatha's Soul Cauldron both go very well in that deck. If you're playing a commander deck that cares about exhaust, you might be playing the new Loot, for example. Both of these cards are exceptional in that deck. Training Grounds will make the abilities of your exhaust creatures cost 2 less. That's particularly good with creatures with 3 or 4 mana exhaust abilities. I'm thinking of Drakorion Engineer and the 1-drop Goblin, which is a 3 mana discard 2, draw 2. Those are really good effects to get on discount. Not to mention exhaust abilities do buff the stats of the creature too. Agatha's Soul Cauldron lets you exile an exhaust creature from your graveyard, buff up a creature with 1/1 counter, and then that creature gets the abilities of the exhaust creature. You can do a lot with something like that. You can give your tokens, if you're going wide, exhaust powers, something that you can really abuse. I think the high point would be if you could somehow exile Loot and use any of his 3 exhaust abilities on the Soul Cauldron to give all your creatures those exhaust abilities, you know, dealing 3 damage, making 3 mana, or just drawing 3 cards. I think all of those are brilliant effects. The next card I want to talk about is Impact Tremors. If you've played with this card in Commander before, you're probably well aware of how easy it is to deal a ton of damage with this card. Impact Tremors gets a lot better, being one of the most straightforward ways to hit max speed when you start your engines. This goes further as well to Gev, the Lizard Commander from Bloomborough. I think the Lizard decks that were being run earlier, both in Constructed and in Commander, probably want to look very seriously at Start Your Engines as a mechanic. I think Lizards have already been really good at dealing non-combat damage and accruing speed. They got a new Lizard this set that is perfect for that. I think Lizards have a whole new game plan they can tap into, and I think they can become a very aggressive, fast deck both in Constructed and in Commander. Definitely going to be brewing a Lizards Commander deck, I reckon. Next up, we're going to be talking about Simulacrum Synthesizer. This is a card that has always been sort of in the background of Standard, hasn't really managed to crack into sort of a top deck. However, with Aetherdrift and all the new artifacts it can synergize with, this may be the one. I am specifically talking about the new Gearhulks in blue. Probably the main one being Riptide Gearhulk, but there may be a world where Dimir, Oil Deep Gearhulk, wants to run this. And then the other one that's worth mentioning is a card called Memory Guardian. This is a 5 mana artifact with affinity for artifacts. All these new artifacts with affinity, definitely the kind of things that Simulacrum Synthesizer wants, because they let you sort of cheat the you need to pay 3 mana at least to get the effect. The Simulacrum Synthesizer deck always really did well once it got a couple copies of Simulacrum Synthesizer. Getting to that was always a challenge. These new creatures might be enough to get you over the line to be able to get your Simulacrum Synthesizer engine out and just swarm your opponent with all these constructs. Next to talk about is the Surveil lands. The Surveil lands being from Murder's a Karlov Manor. They've always seen a bit of fringe play as a 1 or 2 of in a lot of different formats. I highly recommend them for Commander decks, being a fetchable land that, you know, if you want a tap land, you can also get a Surveil trigger out of that. I think they're getting a massive buff, particularly in Constructed and mainly Standard, because of the new Verge lands that have come out. With all the Verge lands now being an option, I think having the Surveil lands around will effectively allow you to more creatively build 3-color decks, and I do think that's something that will probably require a bit of experimentation. I think one of the things we need to work out is how much of the 3rd color you can run comfortably, but I do think 3-color decks could be a real thing, and they'll probably be running Surveil lands to give the basic land types so that the Verges can tap for all colors if they need to. Next up, we're going to be talking about zombies. Zombies in general. If you are a zombies player, you probably have eaten So good, this set. Better than any other creature type. Not only did you get a new precon with Hashaton and Renewed Solidarity as 2 new exciting cards, you also got Crypt Caller Chariot. That zombie precon also being in white, I think gives zombies players a very real reason now to also go into white and abuse the powerful cards in that color. I'm talking about stuff like Anointed Procession and Smothering Tithe. Zombies have already always been really good at making tokens, and you could run 3-color zombies with Verena, but now you just have so many tools that zombies have a really, really big power increase this set. Next up, Ill-Timed Explosion. This is a board wipe from Murders of Karlov Manor. It's here being a direct buff as a result of Monument to Endurance. I mentioned in my video covering Monument to Endurance how in Standard in particular there is a very powerful 2-card combo of being able to wipe the board and draw a card. So we see this with Up the Beanstalk and Sunfall. We also see this with Sunfall and Caretaker's Talent. Ill-Timed Explosion and Monument to Endurance is another way you can do this. So you'll cast Ill-Timed Explosion, discard a high mana cost card or enough to wipe the board. You'll discard 2 cards and trigger Monument to Endurance twice. And all 3 of those options you get are really good. Monument to Endurance is, in my opinion, at a criminally low price for how efficient I think this card can be. It's also 1 mana cheaper than Sunfall, giving you 1 turn earlier to stabilize against those aggressive decks that might be trying to rush you down. I think this is a very real combo, and I do think we'll be seeing a lot of it in the future. Next up, if you are familiar with the theming of Aetherdrift, this one shouldn't come as a surprise, but Abrade is on him. Abrade being a removal spell that can also outright destroy artifacts. For that reason as well, Vandal Blast absolutely should be on here. Both of these cards are Premier Artifact Hate in red. I like Abrade because of its flexibility. You don't just need to have an artifact on the board to target to make use of it, and I do think that gives it a bit of an edge. Vandal Blast can be exceptionally good in longer games of Commander where you're a lot of turns in, there's a lot of artifacts on the board. Obviously can completely wipe the floor with an artifact player, but both of these cards have gotten considerably better, I reckon. Insidious Roots and Tyvar Jubilant Brawler are both cards representative of a Golgari kind of self-mill deck. Insidious Roots is the poster child of that deck, where you effectively want to use cards like Tyvar to effectively reanimate very low-costed creatures in your graveyard constantly to get Roots triggers. Those Roots can then be tapped immediately, courtesy of Tyvar, to be able to generate more mana, mill more cards, and so on. Now, why did these 2 cards get a lot stronger? Because we saw 2 new cards that go really well with them. That is Malt Tender and Dredge's Insight. Both of these cards really fit right into that deck. Dredge's Insight mills you, also heals you just for playing this strategy. Really, really strong. And Malt Tender is not only a way to mill a card, it also taps for mana once you get your engine going, which, you know, all you need is 1 card in your graveyard and it can be a land or else. I do think these are both very strong cards in the deck. Whether or not that will push the deck up into a really powerful strategy, we will see. I do think it is held back by the next card we are going to cover, and that is Rest in Peace. This is blanket, I will destroy all graveyards. Both in Constructed and Commander, this card is getting better and better with every set. I think it's not just black decks that care about graveyards. I think Rest in Peace is becoming so important for shutting down so many strategies. It's a bit of a salty card to use in Commander because, you know, you can really shut down an entire deck just with 1 enchantment. However, what we've seen over the last few years is the deck that it hoses the most, Mono Black. There used to be an argument that, oh, well, if I play Rest in Peace against a Mono Black player, they're just toast, right? There are now multiple ways for Mono Black to even deal with Rest in Peace. You know, you don't just have Feed the Swarm anymore. You have Writhing Torment or Withering Torment from Duskmorn. You also have Invoke Despair if you are in Mono Black, which is a pretty solid card for Black to run. I do think that even Black has ways to deal with Rest in Peace now, making it potentially a little bit more tolerable. Again, I do think it's a pretty frustrating card to deal with, but I do think its power level continues to go up with every set and all this graveyard nonsense we keep seeing. The final card we're going to be covering is also another card that absolutely gets hosed by Rest in Peace, Apparent Oculus. You might be familiar with this card from Duskmorn. It has defined decks so far. There's an Azurius Oculus deck in Constructed. It's also brilliant in Commander because it triggers on every other player's turn. Why is this card here? Well, as it turns out, Ketramos synergizes incredibly really well with a Parent Oculus. We're already seeing in Modern, there is an Esper deck that is using Oculus, just hard casting it from your hand to exile cards from your grave, which Ketramos sees and draws you cards off of. It is actually a very frighteningly powerful combo, because Abhorrent Oculus exiles 6 cards. You only need to find one more card to exile to get Ketramos online. I do think that's very powerful. Outside of Standard, you get really, really good cards like Unearth that hits both of those creatures as well. Obviously, you got Helping Hand. I do think there's a lot of potential in this card and this combo. Oculus, unfortunately, is already a very expensive card, and I can't see it getting cheaper because of this. That's been the cards that have gotten a big buff from the new Aetherdrift set. Next week, I'm going to be covering the cards that have been making an impact from the new set. So these are the cards that are defining new decks or breaking the meta. Stay tuned for that, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers!